Okay, so I'm about to ride the KTM 790R for the second time, and this particular bike has been crashed several times actually, and has stood up very well to that. I know a lot of people are worried about the fuel tank particularly being low down and vulnerable, but it's actually, with those side bash plates, stood up to that very well, and all the plastics have just got kind of cosmetic-y scratches rather, and I've done pretty well basically. And this particular bike is owned by my dealer friend, and he's done quite a few things. You can see this very hefty clamp on the bars here, just running one mirror at the moment, a smaller mirror. He's got these handguard protectors with the metal frame. He's also running an Ergonomics exhaust system. It's a link pipe with Ergonomics N-can, standard fuel map, and he's also running Michelin Anarchy Wilds, which are a lot like the Conti TKC 80s. They're very knobby tyres for off-road use only. It'd be interesting to see whether they create much squirm or noise on the road, or feel particularly you know, chunky like a lot of off-road stuff does. And also this vehicle has done nearly 3,000 miles now I think, and so the one I rode had literally done about 10, so be interesting to see how this feels now on a bike that's more run-in. Apparently there's been no problems with the vehicle in terms of reliability and so forth. It's also fitted the Garmin, as you can see. Get it to work, and we're up and running. So I have to say the Anarchy Wilds feel pretty good in the dry. It's only 46 degrees at the moment, so it's pretty cold. The tyres are stone cold, but actually they don't feel ridiculously chunky, and they don't feel ridiculously square when leant over through the bends. So a crisp day, but pretty scenic in sunny Georgia weather, which obviously I say a lot because it is sunny. And I have to say this is a bike I really like. It had a tremendous reception at its world launch, and subsequently the journalists that have ridden it and personal owners and people that have demoed it all seem to like this bike. Most of the magazines are calling it the adventure bike of the year, and I kind of get that. There's some game-changing things with this bike, such as putting the fuel tanks down by you know, beneath the radiators and exhaust, right at the bottom of the bike, keeping that weight low. And particularly in terms of off-road use, this bike just feels so light and manageable and skinny compared with you know, the heavyweight touring adventure bikes, as it were, the Tenere, the Multistrada, the GS, and of course KTM's own big bore adventure bike. So in terms of cruising, 6th gear, 50 miles an hour, just churning 3,000 revs. So at legal speeds it's a very you don't have to rev this thing particularly hard. You're not missing the torque of a bigger bike at these low speeds. Now a lot of people will bemoan there's not much bodywork here, particularly as we get into kind of winter time temperatures, but actually I like it because particularly at legal speeds the airflow is very smooth. You're not really getting the horrible buffeting that you can get when the screen doesn't suit your height and shape. And one thing I said on the first ride was that the seat is fairly firm, and I would still say that is the case, but that's the case in a good way. You know that if you've ever replaced your stock seat for a really good aftermarket seat, you know, from Mustang, Corbin, Touratech, all the usual suspects, those seats are usually firmer, and they take about 1,000 miles or so to bed in, and then they're better for longer journeys, for sure. For if you're just going around town, you go out on your bike 20-30 miles, stock soft seat, suspension's usually really good. But if you want to go out all day, then something firmer is usually the order of the day. And I suspect this is kind of, once you get used to the ergonomics, this is probably ideal. Now, for such a tall bike, my legs are a little bit more cramped than on a 1200 adventure bike, but not in a bad way. We're not talking race replica or anything like that, or even kind of sporty street bike, but it's more compact. But I guess that it also appeals to people shorter than my 6'2" anyway. If you're more of average height, say, you know, 5'6" to 5'10", 11, 6 foot even, you're probably going to prefer the ergonomics of this bike. The bars feel great. They feel a bit like a Street Fighter actually. They're quite wide, but not too wide, and they're quite low. And the bike is very thin in a Ducati KTM Husqvarna kind of way, and the whole thing really does feel light, lithe, agile, and that's its primary pro, I think, over the big bikes. Obviously it needs chain if it's going to go off-road, because if you get stones in your chain and sprockets, they tend to just break or shear away. You get it in a belt drive, it's going to hold the belt. Shaft drive saps power, and is heavy and makes the weight, that heavy weight, towards the back of the bike rather than mass centralisation. So it's not ideal for off-road, although, you know, people with GSs and GSAs manage some light kind of fire trails pretty happily. But this is much more hardcore. You could do proper, you know, if you're a tall guy with reasonable strength, I think you could really hammer this off-road. If you know what you're doing in the right hands, I think it would be quite a useful weapon. Not as agile as a 250 or something like that, but of course if you're riding to the trails particularly, then this is great, because this will do the freeway work pretty nicely as well. Just give it a few more revs, see what it feels like. Second gear, 6,000. A few tingles through the foot pegs, nothing outrageous. Reasonable torque. Yeah, I'm glad I'm riding this today, because it's quite a contrast to riding a stock brand new bike with 0 miles, right? It's a lot of the changes are the sort of things that typically an owner would do, because this bike is definitely going to be ridden off-road some of the time, so you're probably likely to put some extra heavy duty handguards on, that kind of thing, and maybe the exhaust, lose a few pounds. Although I have to say, it doesn't sound any better than stock, I don't think. I'm pretty sure this is a legal exhaust system. But the Akropovich does look nice, so if you've got a hole burning, get it. But it's nice to try this bike. You know, you've got the Garmin GPS, really nice mount, it's very clear, I like that. Sat high above the clocks. Those clamps look freaking awesome. I don't know whether they would change because of one of the offs, or whether you just fancy something that looked very military, post-apocalyptic, but it looked freaking cool. And I have to say, I love riding this bike. If it weren't for the chain, if it was like belt drive or something, I think I would instantly be there. I think I'd want one of these either as a second bike, or maybe even possibly as a first primary adventure bike for solo use. It does have a good grab handle and a fair pillion seat with reasonable stretch to the pegs, and this particular bike also has a rack on the back of it as well, which is useful for like day bags and what have you, but it's not the ideal perfect pillion bike in front there. The GS Adventure is that, but for solo use this rocks. And now this one's bedded in at 3k. It feels pretty good. This was the actual bike I rode that had 10 miles on the clock actually, so it's good to see what it feels like 3,000 miles later, and the answer is pretty good. This one's been ridden off-road a lot and really abused a lot and crashed at high speeds a lot, and it stood up to it pretty well. So people that say that KTMs are not well built and they're not reliable, I think they're talking about, you know, Dukes 20 years ago. That kind of thing wasn't so great. Nowadays they're good, you know, certainly as good, I would say, in my personal opinion, as Ducati. And you know, you'll either agree with that or disagree, or not have a view on that, but I think they're up there. I'm not suggesting they're BMW, Honda, Yamaha reliable, but I think you know, for what most people want a bike for typical annual mileage and all the rest of it, it's as good as anything else, whilst being a lot more exciting both visually and to ride. You know, KTM's marketing mantra is ready to race, and I think it's more than just a marketing slogan. It's what the company lives and breathes. You look at the DNA of every bike they sell, it's about going quickly and managing that speed. It's always got the top draw WP suspension, which they own. They've always got good brakes. They're always an emphasis on lightweight and agility, and there's always a whole host of race parts available to buy for the bikes after you've bought the main event. Let's go down the first gear. Oh, that exhaust sounded a little bit rorty there when I was able to rev it out. Yeah, perhaps there's a few more decibels coming out of the Akropovich than I initially gave it credit for. And the bike seems a little bit more eager in the mid-range. I don't know whether that's a result of the exhaust. As I said, it's still on the standard map, or whether that's just a case of running in. It's got a few more beans at the crank. I suspect it's just a case of bedding in. The bike feels that little bit more lively now, and it feels, you know, in this kind of urbanish environment at least, it feels ample power wise, and the extra agility is definitely welcome. Now this is the sort of environment where the GS Adventure ahead, as balanced as it is, you do feel its weight on occasion, particularly if you have to stop and it's like an off-camber road, or you've got to do a U-turn or something like that. It's not the end of the world. It's a bit like owning a, I don't know, a Jeep Wrangler, jacked up Jeep Wrangler or something. You're basically you drive it every day and it doesn't seem big, it doesn't seem unwieldy, you know, it just seems good. But if you know, you drive something like I do, an M2 competition, and then you get in a big Wrangler 4x4 jacked up, it feels a bit of a heavy, unwieldy animal, really. Hello, doggy. But I am enjoying this. I could actually quite happily just ride off into the sunset and ride this thing all freaking day. I think it's probably my favourite adventure bike right now. Now, the easiest bike in the world to live with is still my 1250 GS Adventure. It's got all the toys, it's got all the comfort, it's got all the carrying ability, it's got the fuel range, it's got the weather protection, it's got everything, including basically nearly a 30 grand price tag by the time you get it out the door, with all the GPS and electronic gubbins on it that you want. This thing is much more manageable in terms of MSRP. I think the standard bike is standard bike's 13.5, and the R model here I think is another grand, and that'll be about the best, if you've got the legs for it, about the best grand you ever spent, I think. This is good, a little bit of rock and roll at last, and on these Anarchy Wilds, and I like the tyres. I really do like my Michelin Anarchies Adventures, the Mark II version on my 1250. I'm on my second set on that bike. They're great, and these Wilds feel really good. The only thing, of course, with the knobbly tyres, if you do a lot of road mileage on them, they're gonna wear out quicker than a regular kind of 80/20 tyre or whatever. These are much more aggressive for off-road, but I bet they are awesome in the dirt. I really like this thing. I've been thinking lately about possibly a second bike for next year, and this isn't this wasn't really on the short list, but it's definitely a possibility. I've been really thinking about another big bike as a second bike, and something quite different from the GS, whereas this obviously ticks a lot of the boxes that the GS has, or does. But I tell you, if I was in the market for a brand new adventure bike, and I still might be, you've got to say, you know, a new GSA or two of these. That's that's a conundrum. Or one of these and 15 grand in the bank. That makes the GSA look a much harder sell on face value. Depends what sort of mileage you do. My friend Jerry, who does like 1,000,000 miles, put me onto these new gloves, by the way. My new heated gloves. Let's see how they do on setting 1 at the moment. Him and Eric, they're off in Texas at the moment. It's like 32 degrees. The bike's all covered in frost. And Jerry bought his bike in December, I think it was, and so it's not even a year old yet, and he's already done 30,000 miles. So if you're doing those kind of mileage, I think you need shaft drive, you need BMW reliability. You know, go buy an Africa Twin or an R1250 GSA. But if you want to have fun and save yourself a packet potentially, because you know, everything's not built like the Forth Bridge, some of it's kind of more cheaper plastics and stuff, the KTM will make you smile, and that's really what riding a bike's all about, isn't it? Making you smile. Now we're getting out on the freeway, let it rip a little, which will be good, because I want to feel what this feels like now it's run in. It's in top gear now, 65, which is the speed limit, and we're doing 4,500 revs. Feels very smooth, very comfortable. Fourth is a nice gear in this KTM. Fourth and fifth very smooth, around 60 mark. Very nice. I've been riding a good few miles now. I'm not finding the seat feels any harder. It feels pretty good. I feel very comfortable. Got a bit of mid-range pull if you knock it down a couple of gears. It's a pretty smooth engine. It doesn't actually indicate a red line on here, and it runs through to 12,000 RPM. I suspect you're not going to get much power above 10,000, but certainly in the kind of 5 to 7 range, it's producing pretty reasonable torque for an engine this size. Again, pretty reasonable lean angles considering how aggressive these knobblies are. Very, very aggressive knobblies. And this feels nice. I would definitely consider these tyres if I was to buy one of these and use it off-road a lot. I think it would be a wise investment. And I actually think a low mileage used one like this would be great value if you intend to use it off-road, because you will drop it at some point, you will scratch it, and once it's scratched and abused a bit, you're just going to enjoy the bike more by abusing and scratching it more. So why not save yourself a bit of cash, buy one for maybe 9,000 or something like that, with, you know, a few thousand on the clock and some tasty upgrades like this bike has, and then use and abuse it, have fun with it. You know, not try and destroy it, but, you know, perhaps treat it less preciously than you would a $30,000 adventure bike, and subsequently have more fun doing it. So still a great bike. I think KTM have done, I've done a good job, and I like this bike. It's probably my favourite adventure bike right now. I understand why it's Adventure Bike of the Year with most magazines and people. And if you've got any prejudice against KTM, I would say go and try the 790R. You might be pleasantly surprised. Yeah, it's good. It's very good. Yeah, I was surprised how good the Anarchy Wilds felt.
On the street?
Yeah, they're not too chunky, and at good lean angle they felt pretty stable. You don't get that kind of, you know, rocking effect.
Wallowy feel where you feel it might be working.
Exactly. I know Bobby's dropped this one a number of times off-road. It's bearing up pretty well, and I like some of the accessories he's put on it. It's a very good bike, I must admit. I've got a 1250 GS Adventure, and for obviously doing big miles and carrying everything and all round, the GSA's great, but in terms of having fun, this thing's brilliant. Yeah,
I took it to them. I took and did some real off-road on it. It was a little stiff for my little bitty butt.
Yeah, it's firm. No, it's good. Yeah. Yeah, I rate it. Hello Ride On people. Just enjoying a late in the day beverage courtesy of Atlanta Indian and Marietta that I dropped into earlier today, and but before then I was at Woolies Motorcycles in Marietta, who are Husqvarna, Ducati and BMW dealers, and I rode a few bikes there, and excuse the background noise, the leaf blowers are in full swing today it seems. Anyway, just some final thoughts really on the KTM 790R. A few people rode it after I rode it. I was first person to ride it today, but I spoke with a couple of other people that rode it, and some of those owners were quite experienced, either GS owners or Pikes Peak Multistrada owners, or have existing KTMs for instance, and existing dirt bikes and on-road adventure bikes, and it was a similar sort of theme. Everybody came away pretty impressed. Seems to me it's a bit of a Goldilocks bike in that respect. The adventure bikes just seem to get bigger and bigger every year, like some kind of jacked up four-wheel drive, and we keep piling more and more equipment on them and more tech, and they just keep getting heavier and heavier and heavier, and it gives good ride quality, and it gives good practicality, and usually comfort, but it also comes at the price of manoeuvrability and cost as well, because these big adventure bikes now are knocking on 30 grand fully loaded once you get panniers and GPS and quick shifters on them and God knows what. And of course there's a number of small adventure bikes breaking grounds now, and like KTM's 390 and so forth. So there's a bit of a shift back towards what are now called middleweights. They used to be called big bikes when I was a young man. They're 800 to 1000 cc bikes typically, and there's some big improvements next year in terms of things like the Africa 20 1100 with TFT, and that'll be an interesting bike. It's got the spokes for the wheels on the outside like the GS, so it'll wear wheels that'll take tubeless tyres for instance, and the Tiger is being updated for Triumph as well, and of course there's already great middleweight bikes like the 950 Multistrada, etc. KTM is just the latest in that kind of middleweight class, and the really nice thing about it is it's just very lightweight and very agile and very fun to ride. It's also a very good looking bike, and it crashes well, and on top of that it has a fair amount of tech as well built into it. I think off-road, it's killer. It's just going to murder everything of that kind of size and weight. It's definitely the best thing to buy if you have to ride to the dirt rather than load something up on your 250 or something up on your F-150 pickup. If you're actually riding 50 miles till you get to the dirt roads, and then you want to have fun on the dirt roads and then be able to cruise on the freeway at 75 miles an hour on the way home, the KTM 790R is just the right bike to buy. Of course there's the Tiger XCA for instance with its taller front wheel. That's another good option as well. That triple engine is really good, but at the moment the leader of the segment for proper dual sport adventure is definitely the KTM 790R. It's a kind of Goldilocks bike in that respect of being at the right sort of weight and capacity and agility for most people most of the time. As to how well it's built and how reliable it is, that's in the eye of the beholder. 20 years ago I would have said don't touch a KTM with a barge pole, they've got so many problems with their small capacity Duke models for instance. Nowadays they have a big full range, and I don't see them being any less reliable than anybody else, and if the one I rode, which has been crashed several times, is anything to go by, it's actually pretty well built and robust as well. But you spend your money, you you know, spend it on whatever you feel is right for you. But I would say that if you're you know, you're itching to pull the trigger on a 790R, just do it. It's a fabulous bike. Ready to race, the world is orange. Ride often, ride carefully, ride on.